I dipped out of the club sort of stuff by the time the Melbourne bounce thing happened. Can you break down like what it is and how it came to be something that was so fucking big?
Strap in.
Okay. Yeah.
3,000.
I've done it before. I made 20 grand too. So why the fuck are you going to give me 500? Yeah. So like, if I'm going to do all this for you, then you're ripping me off. Like, and they're like, yeah, but we own the brand. I can make my own brand. And then the only thing they're like, well, we got the DJs, and that was like the final part. And then I was like, fuck, I'll make my own DJs. So I went up the road and started this joint called Crover, which is like kind of like the beginning of the second wave of, I'd say, iconic Melbourne pioneer Melbourne Sound DJs. And it was legitimately me just getting as many people as I could, using my network to bring these guys in, and then getting these DJs on that didn't have residencies. Like, so they were all the kids and guys that I knew from the area that couldn't get a chance because they couldn't get an opportunity. And then I brought the audience, and then I made this, like, there's like a little bit of multiple perfect storms. Like, so then what happened was then I brought the audience, and they would play what we were listening to these other guys. And then when the real change sort of happened was they would argue and fight over songs. So for argument's sake, if like a DJ would play back then, this is so odd, but you'd remember if a DJ
Don't burn the big tune before,
Yeah, so you'd own a song. So if you found that song and then and someone played it before you, like I physically remember like watching, and they're actually good friends now. I'm just gonna cough. A guy called John Doe who ended up playing like Revolver and TFU for years and years, and a guy called Heath Renato who had a really successful career and was one of the biggest in that scene at the time. I remember watching them at the front. They were fighting over a song. I can't remember. I think it was Dead Mouse Untitled or something. And one of them had played it before, and they physically had a fight. Like, they were punching on over this song because he's like, I fucking found that song, you dog, and you know that's my fucking song.
At the end of the day, you're playing other people's music, so no one really owns the song. Unless you make the edit yourself, I don't think you can lay claim to it personally.
People did, though. Like, I remember another one. Like, not long ago, I got given a fuckload of records from a DJ. I won't call him out because what he was doing, but there was like 5 copies of them. And I was like, dude, why don't you have like 5 copies of like Music Sounds Better With You Stardust? He's like, dude, back in the day, what would happen was they'd only get 5 copies per store. So he's like, we would go and buy every single copy. So you only owned that song, so no one had access to it. And because it was snail mail, it could take up to 6 to 8 weeks for another copy to come from America if it got ordered. So he's like, you basically, if you had the biggest song at the time and you owned the monopoly of that song because you're the only one with that record, he's like, you could double your fucking fee. Yeah. And so it was actually a strategy back then. So these guys, it was the same thing. Like, whoever had the best song got the best set time. And then if someone ripped it, they'd argue and fight. So what I did was, again, not on purpose, it was like a perfect mistake. I was like, from now on, if you have to be a producer to play here. So like, if you're not making your own music, then you don't fucking play here, because I'm sick of you guys fighting over songs. Like, that's how it started.
You're right.
But it was never an intention to what it become. You know, like I was just like, well, this seems like a good way to fix this, is like, make your own music, and then you can stop fucking fighting over it.
And then I guess it sort of weeds out who's serious and who's not, who's just going to, be a fly-by-night DJ, and then who's really going to put in the hard yards. Because you don't have to use them as promoters. You've got the promotion shit down pat. You need them just to bring the vibes and bring the tunes,
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I dipped out of the club sort of stuff by the time the Melbourne bounce thing happened. Can you, because I'm that bit older than that, I just missed that whole thing, and I was kind of interested in different stuff in that stage of my life. Can you break down that, like what it is? Can you break down that, like what it is and how it came to be something that was so fucking big?
Strap in.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. As somebody who was a bit older, I kind of thought that Udorovic and Lucky kind of played a big part in it. I don't know.
They did at the last part. So there was like, there's stage 3. Yeah. Like, so like the actual end, which turned into millions and millions of dollars and people flying all over the world and shaping music sounds throughout fucking like America and Holland. That was Luke and Co. So they took it to the next level, blew it up. But the story that I'm a part of is the 10 years beforehand, which is the origin.
Let's start at the beginning.
I'm still involved in that part too. I had a lot to do with it, but it was like from the get-go, effectively in short, what happened was, and it's like I'm trying to make it short as possible. It's a long story, but there was T-Rex and Nick Coleman who I would say were the founders of it accidentally. So at the time, there was like Electro House was getting played. So there was House, and then Electro House was like a darker version of, and I was into heavy metal and punk when I was younger. So basically House was almost like, it was too airy-fairy, like, rainbows and unicorns. And then when this electro shit came out, there was more talking about like partying in the morning, and there was like drug references, and there was this like kind of undertone of like heaviness. And now I listen to it, it doesn't sound tough, but at the time it was tough. So what had happened was you had these kids from One Love that were dressed in like bright pink and, you know, leopard printed headbands and shit. And it was sort of like, kind of in a way, it was like the LGBT community kind of mixed together, which is true. That's what happened with House. And then they had metrosexuals, which is like the heterosexual kind of mix between. But it was straight guys borrowing off gay culture, really. And that was its thing at the time. It was like, you know, you remember, but like people, that was basically what they were doing.
I had pink t-shirts and all the
Yeah,
rest of it.
it was
like
straight
the
guys.
hair and,
It was straight guys ripping off gay guys' fashion. Like, and they were sort of in this like utopia. But what happened was there was like a want for this like harder style, I guess. And this joint called TFU, Two Floors Up, run by Jason Colbeck, that was their place that started to play this like more underground sound, which was electro house. And guys like T-Rec and back then like Shardy, Dean Paps, like fucking you know, Spacey Space. The list goes on. I could go on and on with names. Nick Corver, another one. They started to play this like more underground, more grungy, and there was definitely more like a rock kind of influence. And there might have been guitars, and there was like swing beats and all that sort of shit. So these T-Rec and Nick Coleman, and they definitely made different styles, but they started to emulate that like electro house. I know Tarek would be like, fucking don't pigeonhole my music, but this is my version of events, right?
Yeah.
And he started to bring in these like like these massive guitar things and like heavy bass.
Which he was playing those guitar riffs himself a lot of the time. Well, some were samples, but yeah.
He was making them off machines and shit. So like he would argue that I don't think he would argue that he had like a lot to do with it. I would call him the founder. He would say I was just doing my thing, right? But I know, like, because like I went through the whole thing. Like those kids were influenced by what he was making on fucking machines and drums and guitars and stuff. And then his style with this offbeat, you know, sort of dirty undertone and like heavy bass and whatnot was what was the founding. And so we'd go to like, which is kind of like a unique situation in itself, but majority of the music we were listening to early stages, or the bangers per se, like, or the ones that were big hits, were T-Rec or Nick Coleman's, you know, original tunes. And then some of the younger boys were putting acapellas over the top of electro tunes. So like whatever a popular song was, they would live acapella over the top, like Boogs and shit would do that. And they would use like songs that you knew, like back then, like, you know, like fucking mostly R&B songs over these like fast kind of heavy electro beats. So then the guys who were the next generation from Tarek and that, because like they're proper musos, like I know you know them, but like they're proper musos. So these other kids are just DJs on Pioneers and stuff, and this is still going back 2005, 2006. And then there was like a kind of like a perfect alignment. So they're watching the ability that someone can do it, because like T-Rec and Nick Coleman are doing it successfully. They're making songs that are club bangers. They're not getting any form of commercial success, but in the underground, they are like huge. Like those songs still give me goosebumps to this day. I fucking love them.
He's getting close though. He's getting close to getting that commercial success.
He does get one. Don't worry. They both do.
Yeah.
So this is before that, like even. So then they, so then the boys, when I make that rule of like, okay, well, if you're going to keep fighting over music, then you have to learn how to make it. They're like, well, it's possible, right? So they've gone back and gone, cool, T-Rec makes these songs. These are belters. And then back then, you couldn't get a T-Rec song. Like, he wasn't going to give it to you. So you had to go watch T-Rec, or you had to go watch Nick Coleman play these things. And then those guys were very eccentric musicians. So these other kids were more just like, I don't know, like just suburban type kids. But you could get RIP software. You could download fucking Ableton. You could get a computer, like they could do it, and you could figure out how to do it, and you could use YouTube. So new generation, like you got these guys that are not classically trained, but they're proper musicians. They're making these beats from actual instruments. And then the boys they're using RIP software at home to try to copy what they're doing. Yeah, like so. And then what happened from there, it kind of evolves into this like less produced, sort of very much influenced by them, but it's cleaner kind of bass because they're using sample packs, and there's cleaner kind of hi-hats and stuff. So it's not as like band orientated or like, you know, like live music orientated. And they're ripping off that style, but then they're borrowing off your Boogs and your Adam Bartises, and they're stealing these hip hop beats and putting them over the top. So what happened was this really kind of like lo-fi, shitty electro house that was not electro house because it was underproduced, right? And then what happens in that same period is they're orchestrated from TFU at the time. They're doing the same thing. So like then there's this perfect explosion of, and the guys that were involved was like Heath Renata, Stevie Mick, Mickey Knox, Mike Metro, Orchestrated, Callis. Like they're all making this like really shittily produced electro house. And I'm sorry to call that boys, but that's the truth. And then what happens is that because these guys are playing in this little tiny nightclubs with 200-300 people in there, these people know the DJs. they understand that a Melbourne song can be a banger because Terek and stuff have done it and Nick Coleman and stuff have done it. So they start to go off and it's fucking wild. There's a song called, go check it out, it's called Heath Renata, Carnival at the Crover. It is the worst tune in the whole entire world. But it used to play upstairs and we'd have like this little room held like 100 people. And Crover Milk Bar was like the movie. So it was all like mannequins hanging off the wall and it was black and white. It was dingy as it fucking comes. And no aircon, just like absolute sweat fest. So we'd have 200 kids in this room, dude. You could not move. And this guy's playing this Heath Renata. And they're just, has anyone seen my shit? Like this disgusting, shitty, underproduced electro house. And everyone's like, I know that guy. Yeah, and so like they're going nuts. And then over the other side of Melbourne, or down the street really, there's these orchestrated guys doing the same thing with a song called Beach Ball. So there's like these new guys on the block who are doing this style of music that isn't as musically trained as the other guys. Like they're kind of like hack jobs in a sense using RIP software. And then people are like, where do we get this music? So all of a sudden there's this library of tunes that you can't download, you can't rip off LimeWire because people are actually making it in Melbourne. They're making it on their computers and then these DJs are the only ones with access with it. So really quickly, like if you wanted to hear these songs or, you might have been on a mixtape or maybe someone stole from somewhere or whatever, you had to go watch this artist play that stuff. So what happened was we had a bunch of superstars blow up really quickly. So all of a sudden there's like, 14, 15 names that can fill a venue straight away just off whatever song is blown up that week. Mm-hmm. And that was the same time as mixtapes. So we were starting to do mixtapes and giving out mixtapes. So if you went to a club, you give out a mixtape, that would get burnt fucking 10,000 times. And then those songs, it's like, who's that song? It's Heath Renata, Stevie Mink, it's this. Where do they play? Well, they only get to play at TFU or Corova or Rah Rah. So then they go onto this, they have to go visit them. So we've got all these like little underground hubs and it was all kind of like Russell Street to Burke up, like that area was where it started. And majority of the artists came from the southeast, but like Narry Warren, Roval, like there was sort of like this.
It was very suburban, I remember.
Working class, yeah. So it was very much like working class kids that were listening to it and engaging with it. And obviously, like a lot of kids doing drugs, like parents didn't really give a fuck about them. So like they're 17, 18, they're in these hellholes. They're suburban kids. So places like One Love, they're not the beautiful people, so they don't want them there. It creates this like really underground dance culture with this sound that isn't really inspired from anything but I believe, like, that's my opinion, Tarek and fucking Nick. And they're doing their own version of whatever they are, but it's like they are the roots of what everyone copied, but they were not copying really anybody else, And so like that's what they go and do it, and then these guys get better and better at it. They start playing everywhere, and then
did you like the music?
At the time, man, it was just exciting, Like I guess it's
something
like,
new, so it was exciting.
A good version or example of it's probably like boom bap. Like does like boom bap. Does anyone really love boom bap? Like I do now, but when you first hear it, it's underproduced like layers with a real raw rap, and like more shitty the fucking mic, the better, So it's kind of like a boom bap of dance in a sense. Like, so at the time, like I look back and I remember like raving to these songs and being like, because there was this culture of yelling. So, and then this whole thing of smashing walls, and it was very kind of like punk rock in a sense, So we go to these venues. I'm reliving this and I'm full getting goosebumps. But anyway. And it was like, so we'd be in these little shitty rooms that no one really wanted us in, like these, because effectively the only people that would take us were the venues that weren't doing well, because we could bring the crowd, but our crowds were fighters, they were like hired big drug takers, so it was definitely not an ideal crowd. And then they would come in and they would also smash the walls, so they'd actually smash holes in the walls. So on those songs, when there'd be like a gap before the thing, so there'd be like a vocal, so it'd be like, is anyone seeing my shit, like with a build up, and then it'd be like, brr, and before it would go, the whole crowd would be like, fuck, and scream, and then they'd smash the walls, like, and then when the song was going off, they'd smash to the beat, so like, boom, 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 and that was the culture. So it was like, bang them fucking walls, like that was a song, it was like, bang them fucking walls, and the whole crowd, you can see I'm getting revved up, but like the whole crowd would just be like, boom, boom, boom. So we were sort of like these social outcasts, and no one wanted to know us, and that fired us up more, so all the commercial clubs were like, nah, you can't come near us. Like, you guys are fucking outcast rejects. And at the time, we were all wearing black and ripped jeans, and this is before it kind of became a thing. And it was like giant black fringes, and like it was more like everyone was dressing like a metro goth in a sense, Like so, and then it was like the bomber jackets, and it was sort of like street culture meets dance culture. And then because of these audiences coming from out of suburbs, it came with its own dramas. And like there was, as I said, like there was a lot of drugs and a lot of fighting and stuff. And then they didn't leave. So like we were in these spaces that would stay open till 10, 11 a.m. And then all of a sudden it kind of blew up this recovery culture where in that spot you had Karova, Wawa, was Altitude, but it turned into Simba. You had TFU, and they all stayed open till midday. So this area was just this like grungy little precinct with these guys playing this music that no one else got but the people who were in that venue.
Yeah.
And I think that people would come and experience it and they'd watch these dudes play these tunes and it's like, it was like the epitome of underground. They'd be like, what the fuck is this? I've never heard this on commercial radio. There's no way they could have ever heard this. And then this reaction of all these people stomping and yelling and screaming and smashing literally physical holes in the wall. And like I remember being at TFU and like this is actually a serious one that actually happened. But I remember like the floor moving. Like it used to be, because people would jump so much. But there was a joint called Escobar and the floor actually caved in. Yeah, and so like that was how intense the audiences were on the ground. Is that was a serious issue. Like will the fucking
safety?
Yeah, will this club actually be able to hold this type of energy? So that was the early days and the exciting part that people want to kind of hear about now. But
did you ever send some of this stuff? Did you get Tarek? Did you say, man, this is sort of birthed?
Well, dude, he was playing with it at the time, so he was involved. So like the elders in a sense, well, they were involved in it too. So it was like these young guys came up and they were there, and then Tarek was like, they were remixing each other's shit and they were working together. And then I think that he was the one who sort of helped turn it from this like lo-fi, really like low quality electro house into what it became, which was like high quality. Like it got to a point where there was definitely a genre style, but it was well produced. Like some of the songs that are big now, like Orchestrated Nightcrawler, which has become like a Melbourne anthem. And like we just did a show at Riva, sold 5,500 tickets in like 2 weeks, and every single person sang every single word to that song. Mm-hmm. You play that in Adelaide or Sydney, bro, no one's fucking heard that song. Really? Like there's zero chance I've heard it. It's like and that's the thing that's so unique about this style and genre that happened is that these bangers that I show you, like we can do an event with 5,000-6,000 people, everybody knows the words. But if you take them anywhere else outside of here, no one knows it because this was
it didn't go national?
The guys that did, the Udorovic, what he took. So he took the commercial guys, which was like Joel and Will, but they were the ones who were influenced by the original guys. But it was underground, stays underground. Like it's still, you had to be there in a sense. Like these songs, if I show you, you're not going to necessarily get into. Like you had to be in those rooms and you had to be around these guys. The best example I use it is, because I'm a music nerd hard. So Nirvana was not, they were the commercial grunge, So there was like Sonic, I think at the time, Youth or Boom, someone will correct me, no doubt.
Sonic Youth, Mudhoney, yeah.
Yeah, so So it was like they were the original bands in Seattle that started it. They were in these grungy rooms and, everyone was against. And then Nirvana, Right Time, Right Place blew up. So Will Sparks is Nirvana and then everybody else is Mudhoney and Sonic Boom, So these guys were prior to that. And then there's Tarek and Nick, who were the bands before that influenced those guys to originally even try and do grunge, So that was the style, but that scene's still very much alive and well, but it only ever lived in Melbourne. And then where I guess I play a part and why I'm kind of become sort of an unofficial face from it is that I was involved in it in the early days, but I was probably the first to adopt it and promote it. Mm-hmm. So these venues were like very much like, oh, cool, we've got this sound, we're just going to live in this sound and you can't go play anywhere. There's no growth for you. We're just going to try to capitalize on this. Where I was this, again, going back to that rogue promoter. Well, I was like, nah, boys. Like, I was like a fucking Jehovah's Witness. I was like, dude, we need to spread this message. So I was the first one to step out and knock on the doors of Luka Dorovic and knock on the door of Nick Foley at One Love and be like, hey, do you think we could take over a side room? Like, I think this could be something. And then I had my guys, and at the time I started up an agency called Loud Agency. Sorry. And I put all these guys together and then I'd go shop them. So I'd be like, oh, can we put him here? Can we put him there? So I started to I was the first guy to break that mold of residency. So I was like, nah, because the way I looked at it was if I could get them into all these venues, TFU, Revolver, if I could get them into Seven, One Love, if I could get them into these country nightclubs, all I was going to do was bring more audience to my music. So when I did my Roxanne events or I did my Metro events or whatever events, I could bring more and more people. So I think a lot of people credit the expansion of the sound across Victoria and Melbourne to me because I aggressively sort of promoted it. So I put it on my back and then we ended up doing stages at Stereosonic and Summer Days, the bowl and shit. But again, just showing how big it got. I've got footage, I should send it to you. But we used to do Summer Days, right? And it was called the Mini Bowl. This is a good reflection of what we did. We were hidden away the back because we were always were the ugly redheaded stepchildren. So we had like really big numbers and really big pool, but like and no one wanted to admit that they were associated to us in a sense. So we used to do this mini bowl, and we would have just Melbourne artists, like 4 of them or 5 of them from my crew, like the loud guys, and there'd be 5,000 people around. And I've got the footage to prove this, and they're all there just losing their shit, listening to tunes that these boys had made. I've still got all the footage of it, while you had 250 people watching Disclosure or 400 people watching Hudson Mohawk. We were getting more crowds to watch our artists, but then they weren't then putting us on the national tour, because if we did, we would have got 2 people, you know? Like, so there was this unique sort of like sub scene in Melbourne that existed, but it's not micro. Like, it was so big. Like, we were selling out 4,000 or 5,000 people spaces. We were selling out festivals just off these lineups. Like, in Melbourne, it was so fucking big. And it got to a point where, like, if you weren't playing this stuff, you didn't have a club. Like, everything from the local clubs in Ringwood out to Bendigo, Ballarat, they were all playing this sound. But then come New South Wales, there wasn't one song getting played, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah, because I thought it went sort of national, but I wasn't tapped in. Who coined it? Who made, like, because there's the Melbourne Sound, the Melbourne Bounce. Obviously, it sort of stems a little bit from the Melbourne Shuffle, which was kind of predates that, obviously, as well. Where does the name come from?
So it's interesting, because I was talking again to Tarek yesterday, a couple of days ago, and I'm like, because he's like, I don't want to be, like, he kind of in a sense, he's like, I got nothing to do with Melbourne Bounce, and he doesn't. So, and I'll say that here. He's got nothing to do with Melbourne Bounce, but he's got everything to do with Melbourne Sound, right?
Okay.
Because they're 2 different genres. So Melbourne Bounce, and when you get, like, it's weird, but there's purism. So there's guys that'll be like, we were involved in Melbourne Sound, but we had nothing to do with Melbourne Bounce. But then the Melbourne Bounce guys say that they were inspired by the Sound guys, right? So it's political, and now I look back at it and I'm like, who gives a fuck? But basically, the Melbourne Sound was not coined. Like, it wasn't like we had a meeting and we were like, okay, what are we going to call this?
It evolved.
What happened was there was like Electro House, and then everyone knew that term. It had a name. And then guys like Tarek and Nick, and then Orchestrated and Heath Renata, and they started to make a style of Electro House, but it wasn't Electro House. So people would be like, well, you know, it's like Electro House, but like the Melbourne Sound. So it's like the Melbourne version of Electro House. And then as it would go along, I'd be like, what do they play? Like Electro House. Oh, like the Melbourne Sound? Yeah, like the Melbourne version or the Melbourne Sound of Electro House. And then eventually the Electro House dropped out because it started to get its own thing. It's like, what do they play? It's like, oh, they play the Melbourne Sound. So it's like Melbourne Sound. So it's like, that's what's there.
Would you actually put that on flyers?
Didn't have to, bro. Like, people knew. Yeah.
Just knew.
Exactly. It was just the Melbourne Sound. Like, that's what it was called. So people would talk and be like, oh, what do they play at that club? It's like Melbourne Sound. Like, mad, okay, cool. Because I only want to go to a club that plays Melbourne Sound. It was like more of a way to like tell you that they didn't. You know, it's like, oh, they don't play Melbourne Sound. Oh, okay. So they just play normal house, normal electro house. So, and over time it grew, but like when it did go national, because it went international. But basically what had happened was, it got to a point in Victoria where every single nightclub in Bendigo, Shepparton, Majura, Geelong, Sale, fucking every club in Melbourne in the inner city, like Tramp back then, all the clubs on King Street, all the clubs on Russell Street, all the clubs on Burke Street, there was not one not playing Melbourne Sound. And there was still some outlier ones that played techno or, played house and stuff, but they were sort of their own subgenres. But all the mainstream clubs like Billboard, Billboard's side room originally played Melbourne Sound, and then eventually the main room was Melbourne Sound from midnight onwards, So these big giant venues with thousands of people had to have Melbourne Sound, otherwise no one would come. And then it was Victoria only. So then when Luke and stuff came in and they adapted it, because at the time there was like this sort of like, it was called, it was called Dutch House. So Dutch House came in and that kind of blew up, and that's like your Afro Jackson shit. So they came, a lot of these guys who were sort of like not as big as him, they were coming to Melbourne and playing, and they were hanging out with these producers, and they were obsessed with it. Like, what is this? Because you can imagine, man, like traveling around the world and you come to this little city and it's like, none of my bangers work. And then you have some dude you've never met before and the crowd's going, fuck, and smashing the walls. You're like, what is this? So I was touring internationals a lot at the time. And again, goes back to not saying I'm the only person to be involved in it, but a lot of credit falls on me, because at this pivotal point when the saturation's there, I'm sort of starting to get bored with it, and I start bringing in these guys from overseas, and I'm touring them myself around Australia, and they come into Melbourne and they're living, like literally some of them would sleep in my spare bedroom, like back then.
Yeah.
And then we'd be going to like, they'll be producing with my artists, and back then, because I generally thought we were going to take over the world. So I'd be like, dude, you got to meet this guy Stevie Mink, like check out his shit, check out his streams, and then put him in a studio. And then I was trying to like use these tours as a way to like leverage our sound. And then these guys would leave and they'd watch the reactions and they'd sort of participate in it. And then they started to use our sounds overseas, and they were like accrediting it to us. So at the time there was a guy called Tonic guy called TJR, both from America, and then there were some dudes from over in Amsterdam, and they were on meetings, like Laidback Luke is another massive artist. They were saying, oh yeah, this song's influenced by the Melbourne Sound. So they were saying, I've been to Melbourne, this crazy fucking little city. These kids are just making this shit everywhere. It's humongous.
Puts us on the map though.
And then they were the first ones to do it. So they started to do this stuff. And like one is a song, again, if people want to study it, but it was called TJR Ode to Oi. Cool story. He's living at my house. I actually got engaged. He's at my engagement party. He wants to go to the footy. We go to the footy and he's like, dude, this sporting event, like every time, it just sounds like that AC/DC, oi, oi. He's like, every time you got Aussies yell, it sounds like that. Goes home, takes a bunch of CDs from the boys, makes this song called Ode to Oi, right? And it's a Melbourne Sound song, probably one of the first ones to get made outside of Melbourne. And it blows the fuck up and catapults his career. So he's gone from like being I think I paid him $4K to live here for 2 weeks, to being a $20,000 DJ because of this song. Mm-hmm. So then everyone's like, where's this come from? And he's giving the credit where it's deserved. And he's like, I've actually not copied, but I've basically used my electro style and Afro style, Dutch style, to emulate this city called Melbourne, like this place. So then some of our boys were starting to get signed by these big record labels. But the thing where they never progressed is that this is the shortest long story in the fucking world.
It's okay. We got plenty of time.
So where it goes, the next run of guys, and like why a lot of these guys don't get credit, like they were involved in it, is that they start, like one of the guys I worked with, named Stevie Ming, he gets signed to Spinning Records, which is like every big artist in the world who's ever blown up, effectively, like, you're talking about Swedish House Mafia to, deadmau5 probably, that's who you get signed to. So like basically normally that, if you got a 50% chance of being the biggest artist in the world, right? He gets signed to that. Another one gets signed to Bush Records for this song called Grapevine, but then he gives it out for a lift and then it goes on a forum and everyone rips it, so the deal falls over, blah, blah, blah. And with Carl Cox signing it, right? So all these guys from overseas are starting to look at it. But the thing was, this sound was made for underground. So didn't have the commercial elements that these guys who were borrowing it from were using. So guys like TJR and Tonic and stuff, they were like playing these bigger rooms. So they were sort of taking the elements and the offbeat beat drums and the a cappella, sort of all the fundamentals where it sounded like it, but they were like making it big room and commercial. Where the guys that we were working with, they were doing it in 200, 300 people rooms. And yeah, it was working in 1,000 people rooms, but it was a sound made for the underground. So then that's when the new boys step in. So the new boys are young, like your Joels and your Wills, the guys that went on, there's fucking heaps of them. Uberjack, there's Dematic, there's like Timmy Trumpet's another one. These dudes have made millions upon millions upon millions of dollars off Melbourne bounce, but Melbourne Sound.
Because then it shifts to sort of more your bounce.
So it's kind of America and Holland are the ones that bring it back to us in a reverted version where it's like more commercial. And then the Australian kids that were inspired by the Melbourne Sound guys, they then emulate the American guys because they're seeing the success that they're having, and then they blow the fuck up. Yeah, and so like the third wave, but there was actually a dead zone. Like it looked like it died, and there was like everyone moved on. Like I moved on and I started running like house nights. So I was doing like Jack and House and Ghetto House, and I was like, those days are done. Like I thought that, at one point I thought we're going to take over the world, playing in front of 5,000 people at music festivals, and then I was pretty sure that, this is old hat. It was just a moment in time, and I had to move on.
Sorry to cut you off.
You're right.
But did you have that dream because you really wanted to take Melbourne to the world? You go, like, we could go do festivals and people could say these guys are playing Melbourne Sound. Like, was that kind of like part of your driving force?
100%. So I can still remember, bro, like just sitting there and I'm like playing with these guys and we would get those tastes, like, so we'd be playing before massive artists in a 2,000 person room and we'd be playing at a festival and I was just envisioning, I'm like, we are going to fucking take this and we're going to be the next Dutch house. We're going to be the next Chicago house. We're going to be, this is my legacy. Like people are going to remember me forever because I'm the guy who pushed this to the world. And I sort of did by default, but my story kind of ends in the underground, right? And it's sort of like a habit that I've had a lot. Like I was actually involved with a lot of dudes, like no doubt you've heard of them, but Peking Dark and Flume, all those guys early days, I had a lot to do with them guys too. So I've got this like really bad habit. And then again with the hip hop, which maybe we get into, but I was working with Melbourne before. He was one of the first poly rappers before 1-4. So I was involved with that before, and I ran a lot of those shows. So I've got this really bad habit, which is maybe cool, but at the same time, it's like, I've got this really bad habit of being too early. Yeah. And then I sort of help develop and create the scene. and then it gets passed on to a bigger network, and it's something that I've not been able to like figure out how to hurdle yet, you know. But
maybe you get sick of it and you move on. I don't know.
I think I just see it too early, and then I kind of like help them get to that next point, and then I get eaten alive by those big corporations with the money, you know. So, but it is what it is. I don't mind, because that bubbling part is, in my opinion, by far the best part. But yeah, so those guys, those kids, they kind of take off that element and they take it around the world, and they did, and I'm so proud of that now. Like there was definitely a point where I was a bit like jealous, I'd say, because I was like, fuck, you know, we did all the hard work, and these young kids have gone on to make all this money. And Luke, who was a promoter, who early days, you'd hate me saying it, but was like anti it, you know, but when it came in, but he was the guy that it needed, you know, like it wasn't me. It wasn't this underground dude running underground parties.
He was born in clubs, though.
Yeah, and of course. He's like, and he knew all the right connections and stuff. So I wasn't the right person to take it around the world. I was the right person to develop it and take it to where it got to be able to be taken to the world. You know, and the internationals that I brought in, they were influenced by it. The artists that I forced to make music and then sort of helped catapult them and become an unofficial promoter. So I was their manager, but I never took a cut. Yeah, and so I was like managing their gigs and taking care of them. My missus was helping on computers and stuff, but I didn't even know, like this is how green I was. I didn't even know you were supposed to take 10%. I was just doing it so that they played my parties and they were my mates, you know, like, so that's how early I was. And Luke had the ability to be able to turn it into a fucking solid business. So there was a point where it all happened where I was like kind of a bit dirty, because I was like, fuck, that was my dream. But now I look back on it and I'm like, you know, they were the best days of my life, like when we did this and developed it. And I love it. And now, by default, there's this like new interest in it again. And I'm getting to tell this yarn. But like Luke was the guy who needed to come in to take it to the next level. I was doing way too many drugs and I was partying way too much. I could never, ever have done what he did, you know? So, and now I look back and I'm really good friends with Will. I'm really good friends with Joel and all those dudes. And they look back and they pay their dues, you know? Like they say to like all the old boys how they influenced them. Every time they're in a pod, they'll like bring me up or bring them up. So they pay their dues backwards, and it's fucking awesome. And I'm like so proud of what they did. Like they lived the dream that I had, but without me sort of helping create it, maybe they never lived that dream. So I'm just so proud they got to live that dream.
For sure, you're a part of it. Where is that sound at now?
Dead.
It is?
Yeah, they hate me saying it, but no one makes it anymore. Right.
Because then, so with the evolution was the Melbourne Sound, Melbourne Bounce, and then there was like Melbourne Bangers. Was that a thing? People used to...
No, so that was like what they... So basically when Melbourne Bounce was big, which is another confusing thing. So the Melbourne Sound lasted like 15 years in the underground. Mm-hmm. So clubs like Tramp and like, you know, Brown Alley and Levels and all these other places, they played up until 2020. COVID killed it. So what they used to do was then they changed the name to, it was Melbourne Bounce, and then the kids would differentiate it to Melbourne Bangers. So Melbourne Bounce was commercial, that was played on the radio, and then Melbourne Bangers was the underground. But the underground was the same shit. They were listening to the same shit that we were listening to back in 2007. But it was like, that's how the kids differentiated it. Yeah. Right. And so if someone was like, oh, they played Melbourne Bounce here, that was a commercial club where you could buy wet pussy shots and, you know, do Jaeger bombs. If they were playing Melbourne Bangers, it was probably a club that stayed open until midday that you could do copious amounts of drugs in. Yeah. And so so the actual sound, Melbourne Sound didn't die until 2020. And all those underground legends, they made good money. Like a lot of them bought houses and stuff, and they stayed true through that thing. Like they definitely didn't lose, you know? Like it wasn't like they went off and trailed off into the darkness. Like a lot of those guys bought houses, nice cars, like they set their lives up, but in Melbourne only, but they never played anywhere else. Whereas actually, funnily enough, one of them called Orchestrated, they got big in Argentina, so they used to go over there heaps, and they'd play like 10,000 people shows. So that's somewhere that it blew up, like that underground sound. But other than that, it was just Melbourne. And so the guys who blew up, otherwise they became commercial, more and more commercial. It was radio. They're doing fucking remixes with Wiley and stuff like that, and you know, working with these massive artists. Start playing Tomorrowland, all these huge things. But it kind of like it became too mainstream for Melbourne. So Melbourne kind of turned against it, and then Melbourne Bangers continued to stay. But then COVID is what killed that, because then there was no education to hand over, oh, this is what we listened to in the underground. So then what happened was these kids came and their styles had changed, so that died. And then Melbourne Bounce probably, to be honest, maybe died earlier than that. Like the Melbourne Banger stuff probably outlasted it locally, yeah, and like then the spike of the international fame. But those guys, Will, Timmy, Joel, they're still fucking playing all the way around the world, yeah. Like they're
playing that style still, or have that evolved into more commercially dance music?
Kind of hard. Like they've taken the elements, but not Melbourne. They haven't. None of them really. Joel kind of still does a bit, but like Will's kind of hardstyle psytrance, and then Timmy's sort of like multifaceted, open format. It's all about a show. Like that dude's getting paid $200,000 a show in fucking Europe.
Jesus.
Yeah, he's huge.
Wow. Yeah, man. It's such a part of nightclub culture that I just had tapped out, and it's really cool to hear how that really came about, man. Because I had no idea. I was pretty fucking green to it. I'm sure a lot of people that are watching this would not have known that sort of story either.
And for me, like, being able to tell these stories, like, even how I started my platform was like one of the reasons why is that I used to always be like, man, I want to make a doco on this. Like, this is the coolest thing that happened in Melbourne that no one knows about. And I know there's been so many other things. Melbourne's such a unique and fucking cool city for that. But I'm like, now that I've built my platform, I'm like, this is, I really want to retell this story because in a longer format, you know, be it a doco or be it some form of thing, because I always say it's the greatest story I've ever never told, you know, like, and then now that I've built a platform, I'm like, well, I can fucking tell this story now, you know, like, because beforehand, no one really cared. And then even when you were saying before you connected Melbourne Shuffle and there's zero connection.
Right.
So there's not a point where you go, oh, okay, yep, you know, DJ Hellraiser, he helped inspire this guy. So they're so far from one another, but like a lot of people will be like, oh, Melbourne Shuffle, Melbourne whatever, but it's like they were two different unique styles of scene that blew up at different times, and that's what I think makes Melbourne so special. Like, they have no correlation. Neither of them bore off one another other than their electronic music, but they both had these iconic moments that influenced the world. You know, like, name another fucking city.
Yeah, it's true.
2 decades influences the world in 2 different ways, you know?
Yeah, now it's now that similar sort of sound people are calling minimal as well. Like, it's had a lot of different incarnations.
Names, yeah. Well, because there was like a lot of Italian. So again, going back, if you want to get really into it, but the guys who talk about like orchestrating and Heath Renata, they eventually were using that T-Rex sample, and that changed from electro house to Melbourne minimal kind of. But they were taking from these Italian dudes who were making underground minimal. So they were borrowing those elements and mixing it together with the Melbourne version of electro house, and that's actually where Melbourne Sound sort of kind of came from. It was borrowed from Italian techno, and it was borrowed from like whatever the fuck T-Rex was making.
It's deep.
Yeah, it's deep, yeah.
So, man, it was a good long short story, but I'm glad you told it. Let's get back onto your journey. So then, the club thing, you go from being a promoter then to being an owner. Is that kind of the natural evolution?
Yeah. Sit at home, smoke bongs, drink alcohol at the age of 15, 16. I would say pretty confidently I was an alcoholic from 16. Actually ended up in a mental hospital, which is pretty wild. Fighting in the country is just like tying your shoelace. Okay. I say I'm from a long lineage of pieces of shit. That was the first drug I quit. And then I'd go to these dealers and I'd be like, hey, people buying drugs off you. Like, I'll give you these tickets. You're going to get $5 a ticket because I'd get an override, which is $5 extra. If people were going to buy pings off you, like offer them these tickets, they might want to go.